Good afternoon, everyone. This is Arif Qureshi again with ICS. I'm one of the managing principals, and you're joining the COVID Convo, engaging with the local superintendents on COVID-19. We got a pretty full agenda today to cover. And as I talk about what we're going to go over today, just an announcement. Some of you may have already heard this, but just yesterday, Mayo announced a new tool that I think will be extremely valuable for predicting what the future COVID issues look like. So if most of you know that, I think it's Johns Hopkins and IHME have this predictive models and forecasting tools that looks at where the problem is, how many infections are we going to have, how many potential deaths, but that's typically done by state. What Mayo has actually put together is a dynamic tool of forecasting that goes down to the actual county level. So now you're able to predict what your county is going to look like in the future, so that you can take appropriate action in advance. So I think this is one heck of a tool to really start planning in advance. Even though you're getting good data from public health, you're getting good data from the Minnesota Department of Health, but that's data, that's past data in terms of what has already happened. What you're going to start being able to see now with this Mayo tool is by county what the future looks like. So it gives you a little bit of a head start to start planning if you need to switch from one to the other. So Aaron has on this slide, on the last slide, where the resources are. We have the website for that, and you'll be able to take a look at that. So it's a very, very dynamic tool. It's not static. It's updated on a daily basis. So it's extremely valuable information. And they actually use social media and other tools to collect that data and predict what the future is going to look like. So that was pretty neat in terms of what Mayo was able to pull together. The second thing we will cover today is a poll on COVID Convo topics and whether we plan to continue into October. So your feedback when we do this live poll is extremely important for us to determine what specific topics to cover in the future, and if it's valuable enough for it to continue into October. We'll have, of course, Fred talk a little bit about connectivity resources, and especially for tech coordinators. I think technology is going to be a positive, but also a challenge as we move forward. And then we'll talk, we'll have each of the superintendents from Bemidji, from East Central, and Mora discuss exactly how things are progressing in their districts. Neil, again, from the University of Minnesota's Public Health and Environmental Health Group, will give you an update in terms of protective measures to reduce the risk of COVID indoors. And then we'll end with Todd Rapp from Rapp Strategies discussing a little around communication. And of course, throughout the process, if any of you have any questions, comments, please use the chat function. So Aaron, if you can go next slide. Great. So what we'll do is we'll do the first poll. Poll number one is what content has been valuable for you? What do you want to hear more about during these COVID convos? So we'll start that poll. And as we go through the poll, in about 30 seconds, we'll be able to see, all of you will be able to see the results of this poll. So we will be ending the poll now, and we'll be sharing the results for poll number one. So it looks like the big piece, you got 69% on the communications in terms of some of the topics. You also have, of course, extracurricular activities and sports. So that's good. We'll be talking a little bit about the Minnesota State High School League and some of the challenges around that issue. And then there's some other funding resources, facilities, and so forth. So I think this is very helpful. we'll take this information and make sure that in the next session, we address some of the key items here. With that, let's start with poll number 2, which is going to talk about, would you continue to attend COVID convos at noon on Fridays through October? So again, I do want to thank all the superintendents and all the others that are involved in pulling this together. It takes a lot of time and energy, and we want to make sure it's valuable. And if it is valuable, we'd like to know if you'd like us to continue this on Fridays through October. So we'll open that poll. Okay, I think, Aaron, we're ready to close the poll, and let's take a look at the results of that. So I think we've got pretty much yes, definitely about 50%, and probably yes is 50%. So I think that it seems like they want us to continue into October. So I think some of the superintendents that were hoping not to be involved in this, guess what? You're going to have to be involved going forward. So thank you for the polling. Thanks, Aaron. Let's move forward with Fred to talk a little bit about connectivity.
Yes, and thanks, Arif, and thank you for those on the call. That's great verification that these 3 superintendents are providing really good, up-to-date, on-the-ground information for you. You all are going to have people in distance learning, some more than you think, and you also have the hybrids. So I was on a call this week with K-12 Connect with a lot of tech coordinators, and the key thing is upload speeds, because that's how people participate and send work in. They suggested you actually just call service providers to see if upload speeds can be increased. They've actually found that fairly effective. They're also looking for locations where there is no connectivity. Some have found churches. Some have parked school buses at town halls and those kind of things, because they're trying to find partners that can provide connectivity to students who do not have connectivity. And this is a one-to-one kind of thing. You know, you have to reach out and call. You got to identify the students, identify the location, et cetera. There's a sports services model where if they do have connectivity but can't afford it, districts can pay for that. And so it's called support services. I'm not sure about the details, but Wyndham was on the call, and they're paying for 4 families who cannot afford connectivity. DEED has maps of broadband accessibility. You're looking at Pine County. The orange is inaccessible. The purple is under not enough, and the little tiny green is adequate. And so Pine County is one of those areas that has a lot of issues, and Andy will be talking about the steps they're taking in Pine County. But these links here by county and by home address, you can actually get by home address, you can get the list of providers available, and by county you get maps like this. Before we move on, there are 2 other topics that came up in yesterday's conference call with the commissioner that are useful. One is, if you quarantine students, and superintendents will be talking about using the decision tree, quarantine students or staff, they cannot test out of it. A negative test does not stop the 14-day quarantine. And that was a critical thing that Deputy Commissioner Heather Mueller wanted to make clear on. And the other thing is that get your CRF fund applications in. They want them processed by October 1st and back to you. That's just 2 weeks from now. They've already processed 182 and given permission. 57 are in the works, and they have not heard from 303 districts and charters. So put that at the top of your list so you're not at the end of the line to get your approval. And with that, we'll go to Tim in Bemidji. Tim, are you muted? Where'd Tim go?
It looks like he's muted, and I don't see his video either. So maybe we move to the next school district. We can come back to Tim, Aaron, if that works. Okay, we'll go to East Central. Andy.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Andy Almos, Superintendent of Schools here in East Central. Just a situation update for our school district. We are headed towards what we believe is a hybrid learning model in our high school. So here's the situation update with the data. Last week's case rate data was 8.58 cases per 10,000. So we started to get a little bit nervous and started talking about making sure our plans were rock solid. This week we got a little bit closer to that 10.0 with 9.27. And next week is predicted to hit 10.3. In our school district, we actually have a federal prison, and there's quite a few cases right now in that institution. So one of the things we're working with public health is how many of the cases are actually in the prison system? Are the cases contained? And can we put some type of assurance for our community and our staff and our students that the cases are contained, and if we remove those cases out of the numbers, where does that land us? And so that's the communications taking place in our county right now with all of our school districts. And we've moved ahead here with more meetings with public health. We've actually set a second meeting for next week to try to get some more of those projected numbers ahead of time. That buys us some communication timeline and the ability to try to get out in front of it, because probably everybody on this call is watching those case rate numbers like a hawk. And so when we see them on Thursday, like everybody else, we want to make sure that we're ahead of the game and have our plans in order. I want to touch just briefly on the Minnesota State High School League reopening discussions about fall sports. I think it's probably a challenging discussion for every school district. I see us as a small school in a rural location headed towards a kind of a collision course, right? Our data is increasing. We're headed towards a more restrictive learning model, yet we're going to come back and talk about having fall sports happen. I'm concerned about the amount of parent pressure that's being placed on coaches and school districts and families and everybody else that's going out and saying our kids have to play. So we're trying to step through that lightly to say, really our position as a school district is we want fall sports to happen. We'd really like it if our kids could play, but what's the safety plan to make it go? I've heard from families, I've heard from kids that have played AAU basketball in the summer that actually were able to play those things. And I think that collision course is coming here, especially as the high school league revisits that discussion. A distance learning update for us. We are headed down the path like a lot of school districts with finding some staff members to be our digital navigators. As Fred showed, our connectivity issues in our school district are really challenging. What we're finding is that if many times we're able to problem solve with the family to try to get them connected somehow. We have neighbors helping neighbors, kids driving into parking lots to download assignments. But really what we're finding is we need point people that can be those people that take those phone calls, problem solve with families. And so we're working our way through that project, and we hope to have those people selected and going very soon. In the high school, we're a 7 through 12 high school. We have 55 students on distance learning. And what that means for us is that our teachers record their class periods, and then they upload the best one to Schoology. So if you teach 3 sections of English, you take the best one you think that you really did the kind of the perfect job, and you upload it to Schoology for those distance learning kids to be able to participate. We have a distance learning staff member in the high school. It's actually a paraprofessional that has some very outstanding technology skills. And really her job is to check and connect. Reach out to the distance learning kids. What do they need? If we haven't heard from them, if they haven't submitted assignments, if they haven't participated whatsoever, she's there kind of being the mom or the parent and saying, hey, what's going on here, kid? connecting with parents, trying to be that point person to help them be connected to their classmates and their teachers. We've dedicated our PLCs this year to professional development, and I think that's gone a long way with our teachers to just let them exhale a little bit at PLC time and say what's working and what's not when it comes to distance learning. Try to support one another. So, you know, not all teachers have the skills that are really prepared to do this. So we're trying to spread those skills throughout the building. And so we've really taken a step back and taken that professional development time and given it back to the staff. In the elementary school, we have 43 kids on distance learning. We've done this a little bit different there. We have 3 teachers assigned to be the instructors of our distance learning kids. Some of the positives that we're seeing is that we're building these 3 as our resident experts. We just really are planning that even post-COVID, our distance learning program is not going to go away. And so we need experts down there that can work through the bugs and struggle through it and be able to help teachers down the road. And so that's, so far that's been a real, it's a very positive thing taking place in the elementary. An area of growth we're trying to work through is having 3 teachers teach grades K through 6 to varying age groups. You know, we really are going back to a lot to that standards-based instruction, trying to figure out how do we meet the needs of kids at various age groups, various levels, all while having them maybe in the same class for distance learning. As we look to our hybrid transition, really we're in this spot where we see it coming and we need to prepare. So again, we intend to give our teachers 2 days of transition time. So if we get the data on a Thursday, we intend to communicate on Friday as much as we can about when that transition would take place. Likely it would be the following Wednesday. And then we would give our high school teachers Monday and Tuesday to prepare. We currently are on a 7-period day in our high school, and our hybrid plan switches to an A and B block schedule for grades 7 through 12. So our teachers need some time to be able to adjust lessons, plan ahead, and be ready. And I'll tell you, that's gone a long way with our union as well. The fact that we'll put it in writing and we've dedicated that time, you know, they seem to like. Also, we didn't tell them we'd do it in every transition, but especially this first one. It's gone a long way for our teachers, I think, just to put their minds at ease that there will be some time. One of the things we've learned in the last couple of weeks in planning for hybrid is the food service issues that come with this. As we look at our food ordering and when those shipments come in, we need to really think about when does the food come in, how will we store it, and what length of time should we stay in a hybrid learning model. And for us, it kind of comes back to food service. We feel that with ordering and our storage issues we have here, that we'd have to be in a hybrid model for a minimum of 2 weeks. And so I think that's helpful information to, again, put people's minds at ease to say it's going to be a minimum of 2 weeks, but probably more if we make this transition. In the high school, we would move to one lunch option for our in-person kids. So there'd be one line because we do need to package meals for our distance learning kids. So we're going to have to shift some staff around to try to support making sure we can get that done. Probably expand some hours of our food service staff to make sure all of those things get done. The distribution of meals is a challenge. When you have the elementary in person and the high school in hybrid, but we are a K through 12 campus, so we have one food service department that serves both schools. So we have to serve in-person meals and distance learning. And so we're working through how will we distribute those meals to kids so that they have food at home on the distance learning days. And what we're settling on, we think, is at the end of their in-person days, they would take with them the meals that they need for distance learning. So our food service department is working on some type of packaging that at the end of the day, when they're headed to the buses, they can grab their bag of meals, we can check them off, and they can head out to the buses and head for home. So that's a very challenging thing we have as we look at hybrid. In our school district, just this past week, I've really realized we need to go back and really talk about communication. We're 2 weeks in to an in-person learning model. And like every school year, there's a honeymoon period for everybody. And we're just starting to feel the effects of the honeymoon period wearing off. We have a few people losing their sense of humor about wearing masks. So we need to go and review what are the masking requirements and what are we going to expect of students and staff. And let's go back and review it again. We're shifting the narrative. All of our plans have been titled reopening up until this point. But with 2 weeks in, we've said, well, now that we've reopened, we need to shift that narrative now to learning models and transition planning. And so if you're following our website or if you take a look at our documents, you'll start to see that narrative shift. I linked for anybody on the call our learning model transition plan. And again, I mentioned this last week, but a big thank you to Dan Voce and Maura because we modeled our plan after theirs. But if you're looking for just a kind of a basic level communication and planning document, feel free to take a look at that and be in contact with me if you'd like more information, or feel free to use it as you see fit. When it comes to communication, we have to go back to our parents and talk to them some more at this point. When we're planning for transition, we want them to be planning for transition. So we're going to tell them, check the website for updates. I've been watching the number of hits on our website, and when I go in there throughout the day, 3 weeks ago, I used to see upwards of 60 or 70 people in our documents at any given moment. And right now I see nobody. So now is the time to go back and say, hey, our plans are being updated. You need to go back and look at it again because it has changed, so we don't catch anybody by surprise. Again, if we're planning, they should be planning for how it affects them at home. We have to remind parents, especially in the elementary. Now we're going to transition the high school first probably, but the elementary may not be far behind. So do they have their contingency plans in place for childcare? We know that we'll be offering childcare if we get to that point, but not everybody will qualify for that. So do they have contingency plans in place? Help them plan that and communicate out. One of the things we've learned recently is that we have to tell parents and remind them to set up distance learning spaces at home. Get your child prepared. When the teachers pull up, have a Zoom meeting and the kid answers it from their bedroom or laying in bed, that reminded us that we need to go back and say, hey, do you have distance learning spaces set up at home? Parents need to be told that. Is there a location that's an educational space in your house? We're going back and reviewing that MDH decision tree because we've had some situations where we have to talk parents through that. So now is the time to go back and communicate and say, how does this affect your family and what do you do if? Some more of those reminders for staff, again, those masking requirements. As we talk about transition to hybrid in our high school, we're giving teachers time to plan those lessons, but also they need to over-plan. Be ready because they're going to go from a 7-period day to a block schedule. That's a whole different planning scenario for teachers. We're asking them to seek out professional development opportunities in the next few weeks, and we're calling it win time. A lot of districts call it that. What do they need, or what do I need is the win time. Trying to connect them with other districts that are maybe already there, or online trainings, whatever it might take. If they need it, we're going to give them the time to try to make it happen. Fall back to our relationships with our kids. Who are we worried about? We need to talk about. If we make a transition, what group of kids are we worried about in that transition, and how can we help? How can we reach out to the parents? How can we help the kids ease their mind in this transition? So having those staff go back and get their minds prepared for who are those kids they're worried about. Now is the time, with cases climbing, that we need to go back to our high-risk staff members who have told us that they're worried about this and ask them what support they need. We've had some kids come in with mask exemptions recently. So they bring in a mask exemption that says that they're not going to wear it, but then they end up in the class of a high-risk staff member. We need to work through that. What does that mean? Are we going to move them to distance learning, or can we social distance enough to help those staff members be more at ease? And I talked about this last week, but as we sit here today, our administrators are ready to communicate. We've been through their letters together. We've been through their PA announcements. We've been through what we think is everything that they're going to need to effectively communicate in a transition. If anybody's interested in seeing those, I'm happy to share. But our administrators are ready to distribute those things when the time comes we have to make a transition. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. That's excellent information. And we're going to go back and pick up Tim in Bemidji, our largest district. While we're doing it, just remind everyone you can put questions in the chat. And Tim, ready to go.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you for the great information, Andy. Good afternoon, everyone. Tim Lutz, Bemidji Area School Superintendent. And I apologize for the bad timing there. We have very good digital broadband service here in the Bemidji area. We're a gigazone. And for some reason, my connection was very unstable there. And right when I was up, I lost my connection. My apologies. But I'm back now and things are looking stable and good. This is our first full week. My presentation will be looking a little bit different from the other two administrators because this is the first week Bemidji Area Schools is in session. This is day 5. So I want to address a little bit about calming jitters again and how we have been able to address these concerns during our first week. We are all in the elementary pre-K through 5, and then our secondary schools, middle and high schools 6 through 12, are on a hybrid weekly model. And one of the best things or best ways to calm jitters is just to get started. And so we have done that and we have had a very good week. I'm very pleased with reports that I have been receiving and visits that I have made to our schools to be able to find out and to hear that our students are wearing their masks, they're doing their social distancing, they are getting it. Parents are supporting what we're doing. Many of them, of course, aren't happy about masking or other issues that are going on, but they are understanding and they're working with us, and that's been very, very helpful for us. So it's been a good week. Students were excited to come back. We have 4 staff members who have been positively identified, so 4 community members, ISD 31 members of our community, and we have, they are all teachers at this point in time, and we have 385 teachers. So that's basically 1% of our teaching staff. I am not aware of any paraprofessionals or other support staff members who are positively tested or have positive results. We do have 2 students. Fortunately, they are both hybrid students on the B week, so they haven't been in our buildings at all. But we have had practice with the Department of Health decision tree, and that's also a good way to calm jitters, to show ourselves and each other that it does work to use the decision tree and that we can work the process and continue with school and that it works. So some of our staff members, especially at the high school, are a little bit concerned because there are maybe 2 or 3 classes out of the whole high school that might have 1 or 2 more desks and students than our hybrid model would normally and should normally allow. So we are actually calling ourselves a hybrid model 2.0 right now, which is basically developing some language to point out that while we are, yes, in the hybrid model, our county numbers are showing that we could be all in across the board. Because as of last week and into the middle of this week, we were in the 6s and 7s. And so that has eased these concerns amongst a few staff members who are very legalistic and very statistically conscious about numbers, realizing that we could be all in. Now, that being said, I'll address this in just a little bit on another slide, but I do want to point out that, like the others have said or will say, our numbers are starting to go back up again. So we'll have to keep a close eye on that. We're continuing our food service for students who are not in school. We're adapting the summer food program, and we have 2 open sites, and those 2 open sites are providing a great service to our families, whether they're on the off week or whether they're full-time distance learning. And continuing to provide food and healthy meals for families and students is another good way to calm jitters. Transportation is going well, 50% capacity, that's working. Our parents are cooperating with us, and many of them who normally would bus their children are driving them to our various schools, and we have different entrances for those students so we don't end up with a large congregation of students at the same time buses are unloading. So on the next slide, I can address a little bit our enrollment numbers, and the numbers I had last week were very fluid and shaky, but now that we've had a whole week of most of our students in their chairs, in their desks, I've been able to really figure out our numbers and where our students are at. And I'm happy to report that our enrollment melt at the elementary is much less than I originally thought it was last week, which I think it was around 10% for elementary. We have 151 students fewer than we expected from our projections at a 6% melt overall at the elementary. At the high school, secondary, 7% with just over 200 students down. So across the district, 7%. Now, what are we doing to limit this enrollment melt? We're doing a couple things. One of them is, along with our distance learning attendance team, which is serving those 825 distance learners, we have recruited a couple of our secretarial staff members from a few schools that have quite a few students not in attendance anymore. And they are developing a distance learning attendance program, reaching out to families who have children who may not have checked in for a while, because we want to make sure students are held accountable and that they know that, so that they continue to check in every day and not drop off the radar, because that's another concern when it comes to attrition, just losing students dropping off the radar. We are bringing in digital navigators to help families deal with the issues that they might have with technology. Again, we don't want families to give up. We want them to become very adept at working with technology. Finally, an item I don't have on a bullet point here is that, as I mentioned last week, we have at the last minute switched to providing what we call a distance learning student support day just for secondary students. At that level, we have Wednesdays now, which are a day where secondary students stay at home, allowing our secondary teachers to really focus on outreach to families and to students, and to really work on helping students who are struggling with some of their issues. And I want to read just a couple sentences from one of the teachers at the middle school who really provided a nice testimonial to how valuable that Wednesday was this past week. She said, "There are no words to describe how beneficial yesterday was. I wanted to let you know that I was able to connect with 57 hybrid and distance learners. These were students I had seen on my lists. I had answered emails from them. I had even graded their first assignments, but I had never met them. We had great conversations through Google Meets about the class expectations, our likes and dislikes, our struggles, books that we are reading," she's an English teacher, "and our concerns for the coming year. I was also able to connect with roughly 10 families to assist them in getting their students started for the year. Yesterday was an incredibly busy and chaotic day, but for the first time this school year, I left the day feeling as though I had truly accomplished something." So we're working on not only using that day to continue to prevent enrollment melt, but also to calm jitters, especially among our staff who now feel like they have the capacity to do what we're asking them to do. On the next slide, I can get more specific about our numbers and where we are losing students. We're losing, as of today, we've lost 47 students to online charter schools. Our biggest loss, and to me our biggest surprise, was 204 to homeschooling. That's 52 more students than we had last year. So definitely a big bump for us with that loss. Losing 24 to online PSO, and then 35 or so students are returning to their home districts, and those are mostly from Red Lake. The Red Lake Nation's school district is all distance learning right now, so some of those students have returned for that purpose, and that's a big loss for us. And finally, we have about 42 students and families who have dropped off the radar. That's way down from the number we had last week, but we are still working on that, and hopefully next week, which is our B hybrid week, we'll be able to nail down where those students are and get them engaged. Finally, new this week, as I mentioned, our numbers are going back up again, and as you can see from that screen, I'm not sure if you can see all that well, but our numbers as of the MDH from last week, the last 14-day rolling average, which ended last week, was really a good number, 6.33. But just like clockwork, we could predict, and we were concerned about the numbers going back up again after Labor Day. And we are right now 11 or 12 days past Labor Day, and since we have that low number of 6.33, our numbers are going back up again. And we have picked up something like 15 new cases this last 4 or 5 days in the county. So now we're back up to 9.3 in just a week. So we're concerned about that. And something else that's new this week, and specifically today, is the Trump rally in Bemidji. And I am anticipating some additional fallout from that. He'll be coming into town at 6 o'clock today. There are huge crowds already gathering, many of whom are not wearing masks. So I have very little doubt that we will probably be pushed over beyond into the next window when it comes to our model and our numbers. So along with the jitters for starting the new school year safely, we have had these Trump rally jitters this past week. A lot of people are nervous, not only about potential mob unrest between the two groups that are coming to the airport for Trump, those who support him and those who are protesting, but we also know, we hear that there will be protests taking place in downtown Bemidji today. And we're just hoping and we're keeping an eye on things to make sure that everyone stays out of harm's way in our schools and on our school buses. But we're learning, we've developed an emergency operations plan which deals with all sorts of hazards. We've spent the last 2 years working on that. And as we rated the viability and the potential risk of various hazards last fall, 2 of the hazards that we thought were fairly low, which were a pandemic and protests and riots, amazingly, are towards the top of our list now. And it just goes to show that we have to be prepared for any potential hazard when we're working in a school system. So that's what's happening in Bemidji this week. I hope to have more updates, more specifics next week. Thank you.
Hey, good afternoon. Thanks, Andy and Tim. Always, for me, being a first-year superintendent, just awesome to hear all the things I learn. I take notes. I've already got a page of notes, so thank you guys. I appreciate that. Our current situation in Mora is much like the others. We are seeing our rates go up. There's a little graph on the right-hand side, and you can see in the past couple of weeks, the last 14 days, we've had some upticks, and we're anticipating that our numbers are going to creep even higher to 20, which might move our elementary into a hybrid model. So we're hoping that that does not happen. I guess we're also preparing to be in the hybrid at the high school, probably through MEA break or EM break. So that's kind of where we're at. We did have a positive case within our community, our school community, and we had an opportunity to practice now several times the decision tree. And like the others mentioned, it's really a helpful tool. It's a good visual for us trying to manage that, and also for staff or parents trying to figure out what they need to do. Public health has been awesome as far as helping us trace, helping us with letters to give our families and our staff members. I think I mentioned we are in-person learning at the elementary and a hybrid model at our high school. And so we're getting ready and planning, like Andy said, to be ready to shift models. And so we'll give our staff some time, like East Central is, to prepare for that. Upcoming, we have a half a day staff development. I think we'll try to change that to a full day. So, okay, Aaron, I think you can go on to the next one. Really just what's going on here in Mora. I've been really impressed as I walk around and look into the classrooms of the elementary and the high school. Our focus is shifting a little bit, and kids are in our schools for now 2 weeks, and we are seeing students learning, we're seeing teachers teaching, and that's a positive sign. And parents are appreciating the fact that students are learning, and so far we've been able to keep people safe. The other thing that we've been trying to do as an admin team is really recognize and appreciate all of our students and our staff and our families. So our communications really have been focused on recognizing those, students and staff and families that are stepping up. And we've had many team members, like all the other schools, that are stepping up to support whatever operations. I know we have a couple of staff members that have jobs during the day, but they're also drive bus before school. And now we have double busing runs. And so they're on those routes longer. And we have drivers that we don't have enough drivers. So we have our transportation and our mechanics are stepping up to drive the buses. So those are the kind of the stories that I try to share with our other team members and our families. I also, I guess, would note that I'm seeing people get used to the new routines and expectations that we have for school year 2020. And once we're kind of settling into that hybrid model at the high school, and the elementary students and staff are settling into the routines and expectations that have changed quite a bit. So that's been a positive. As the others, I think Tim mentioned the enrollment piece. We were looking at maybe only down 20, which wasn't too bad, but now looks like we're maybe down 50. So we're gonna have to do a little more investigating, and that's why I appreciated Tim's breakdown of where all his students have gone. That's an idea that I think I'm going to take from Tim. You can see that we have about 222 of our 1,600 students that are doing the distance learning. We call it the Family Flex, or about 14%. And so, like Andy, we have a few elementary teachers that are combining grades, like K1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that are teaching those elementary students. And at the high school, we're doing, all of our teachers are teaching the distance learning. So that's kind of the model that we're doing. It seems to be working well at the high school because we're also doing the hybrid. So teachers aren't asked to do two different things. Like Andy, we actually have a person for a digital navigator, and I met with her and our tech person, and we're starting to contact families that we have identified that need help with connecting. We have, I think I mentioned this maybe a week or two ago, we have a blue hour at the high school, and teachers make sure that students have all they need downloaded on their Chromebooks before they go home for the days that they're off. And so that's been helpful. And I guess the high school league survey is something that we were all kind of surprised about. That came about very quickly. And probably like a lot of other rural communities, football is an important part of our fabric of our community. And in Mora is no different. You can see the local newspaper this week that just came out yesterday. Football and volleyball are sidelined. And so there's a lot of passionate people that want to see those things come back. And I'm with Andy and probably all the other superintendents. I'm just curious on how we can do that safely to make sure that all of our students and coaches and fans can do so safely. So just a little, I guess, messaging and communication. I think that we're communicating with our staff and our families that let's make sure that we're sticking to the basics here. We know what works: masking, distancing, hand washing, cleaning, and keeping down those gatherings. And educating people on the decision tree is going to help, so they understand when. It's not if, it's when something happens, we know what are the steps that we need to take in order to make sure our community is safe. Make a Plan Minnesota, I believe, is something that the state has come out with. And so we're sharing that with families. What are we going to have to do, or what are families going to do when we do have to shift to another scenario? Like I said, our elementary might be going to a hybrid. So I want families to know they got to start planning if they need daycare or they need to set up their kids at their home, what's going to happen. So that's not an easy thing for families, especially in rural Minnesota where our daycares are not so prevalent. Self-care has been a big topic that I'm looking into, especially for our students and our staff and our families. And I met with our social workers and guidance counselors this week, and they've established some things that we're going to do, and we're going to try to enhance that now moving forward for our families and staff, and what we can do to help keep our community not only safe, but taking care of ourselves so we can be our best self every day when we come to work and work with our students. And then I just reinforce the team model of we're better together, and trying to instill that confidence within our staff and making sure that we're checking in on each other and supporting each other as a team. So those are the messages that we're sending out from Mora schools.
Hi, we can go on to the next slide. One of the pieces of information that came out is from a group of people at the university, is a layering of protective measures to reduce the risk of COVID-19 indoors. And I really liked this graphic that they had made available to kind of give people an idea of some of the things that you can do to minimize the transmission of COVID. And a couple of things they have in the diagram. They have portable air filters. They have a location for hand hygiene. If you can possibly open windows, that's something to do, or at least increase ventilation, making sure you have good filtration. In some cases, use barriers to minimize exposure. Some work on disinfectant, mask and protective wear. So and then in cases where you have UV lamps. So those are all the different tools that you can use to employ to make things better. One of the things that we are actually doing is we're setting up in anticipation for an increase in cases on campus, is we're setting up a place where we're doing the testing. And one of the things that we chose to do is that after we're done testing, we're going to be cleaning the carpets. And because we're testing people that have a reasonable chance of having COVID, we're probably a little bit more risk than most of the other areas on campus. So instead of doing a normal HEPA vacuuming of the carpet, we're pre-treating the carpet with a hydrogen peroxide-based solution first, letting that dry, and then do a HEPA vacuum afterwards. One of the things that people need to realize is that when you do HEPA vacuum, even with the best HEPA vacuums that you have, the particle generation that occurs during that HEPA vacuuming will create particle counts that are up to 100 times background just by doing the method of vacuuming, even though you do have a HEPA filter on it. So when we look through as a risk assessment on that, we said, at least in this specific environment, it makes more sense to decontaminate first and then HEPA vacuum later, so that we aren't redistributing aerosols into the space. Next slide. The CDC has come out with a really good guideline for preventing exposure using cloth face coverings. And we have a large number of slides that are appropriate with it. One of the main problems that we've had is individuals that really don't like to cover the nose. And we've had to figure out ways of enforcing that or getting people to do that. And I think a lot of people that I've talked to that have been in daycare facilities, been in teaching environments, is that even some of the teachers are ones that are least compliant with it, and they keep dropping it down below their nose. And based on all the data that we have, that really puts that person at risk, and it also puts the other individuals at class at risk. And Arif put a note in the chat about at-home testing on it. And I think that's something that's going to be coming out. It's going to be more prevalent. We're just going to have to wait on it a little bit, but that will be methods of testing for individuals, so that if you're at home And instead of going to a location to get testing, you'll be getting a test kit that you can use, and it'll test your saliva, and then you send it in. If you aren't sure how to do it, there'll be a video chat feature so you can interact with the physician or a person, a healthcare provider, and they can say, here's how you do it, and you can have the testing done there. And I think that will be one of the ways of really helping to control the spread of the virus. I've now encountered several people who've had various cases of it, even after negative testing, and they've been airlifted to hospitals and are in very serious condition. So I don't wish that on anybody. So thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us once again. I think if I took anything away from the discussion that the three superintendents had with us today, it's how impressive the foundation that they've established for good communications, because they started early and they continued to connect with parents, with staff, with students, with their communities. It's made it easier for them when they have to make adjustments in the plan locally, or when issues come up, maybe it's the state high school league decision on fall sports or other issues. They built a strong communication platform. I was also interested to see the percentage of you who said you wanted to hear more about communications. In between these Friday meetings, if you have any questions at all, please email me or call me, and I believe Aaron's got my information on the ICS website, but don't be afraid to reach out. This is an important issue, and I want to make sure to give you the help that you need when you need it. So I'd like to just share three things with you right now as you're thinking about not only where your districts are or where you're going. The first is just a reminder: keep communicating about more than just the pandemic. It's critical that you get out this information now about COVID, but at the same time, it's also critical that you're sharing information about what's going good through at the district, other challenges that you're facing. And let me give you a different way maybe of thinking about this. All of you may have some families who have chosen a different educational model for this year for themselves. Maybe they've moved away from the school district. You want to bring those families back. And one of the things you have to keep reminding your community is, even with the struggle of the pandemic, we're doing great things with kids. Our kids are succeeding, and it is so important to continue to be educated in the school environment. The second thing I wanted to remind you of is that you need to make sure that your messaging is not blending into the surroundings. After several weeks of school, the places where you set up the signs for the students to learn about distant learning and masks, those begin to look like they're the same color as the wall. It's important that you find different ways, different times, different methods of communicating with your parents, with your students, and with your staff. Making sure that they're starting to see the information in different places, because that's just a way of just further reinforcing common messages that they've been given. If you show them that information in a different place, it will begin to sink in again. I'd also suggest that you may be reaching the point where you need to focus your communication not on everything you can tell people about proper hygiene and public health practices, but maybe you have to spend a few days focusing on one particular issue. And I'm going to guess masks may end up being that issue. And if you have to do that, and therefore you're not communicating as much about some of the other practices, that's fine. You can go back to those. But you want to make sure that you and others can get that information out on the most important issues. And as we all know, it's really, really critical that people are using masks indoors and when they're in places with a significant number of people. The final thing I wanted to say is this. Today is the first day of voting. We have 46 days of this campaign left ahead of us, and we have no way we can avoid these issues becoming political, whether it's as simple as mask wearing or as complicated as when you move from hybrid to distant learning. At times, it's going to seem like the political swirl this year is going to almost hypnotize all of us. But I would just advise all of you, stay above it. Stay as apolitical as possible. And what are some ways of doing this? Well, when you're communicating why you want to have masks or 6-foot separations, talk about it in terms of what medical science teaches us. But I would suggest not identifying prominent national scientists. It's too easy for people to become polarized hearing those names. Talk about the state restrictions instead of Governor Walz's restrictions. Use local public health or local hospital systems as to help you communicate, as opposed to always trusting our state or national sources. I wish I didn't have to give that advice to you, but the truth is that this is going to be a very partisan, very polarized, and at times a very difficult election to get the facts through. It's going to take us a little bit of patience. I think you're going to find that we're stuck in that situation where until there's some kind of major outbreak in a state near us at a high school or an elementary school, it may be difficult to get through some of these messages. But the more nonpartisan and the more apolitical that you can make it, it's just going to be easier for you to have those conversations with people who maybe aren't as committed to you are towards good public health practices. So last thing I'll say is where I started. Please reach out to me if you've got questions on communications. Happy to help. This is an important time.
Well, thank you, Todd. Those are great words of advice. And the superintendents, each one, I took a lot of notes. Each one could be a little mini lesson. And I don't see any questions in the chat room. So Arif, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, let me just close it out real quick, but maybe on a positive note, right? So I know we're dealing with a lot of negativity and a lot of confusion and a lot of people concerned and anxiety. And there's 2 points I just noticed recently that are, I think, real positive. One is, some of you may have seen this, but there was a research study that identified that airline workers' rates for COVID infection rates are significantly lower than the general population. Now, why is that important for us? Well, there's a reason, because number one, they're in a confined space for long periods of time, but their rates are much lower. Why is that? Well, it's simple, because engineering controls work. Same with schools. And guess what they're doing? You have to wear a mask, and the filtration is much better in the ventilation systems. Those are the two, and they're disinfecting, right? They're sanitizing the space. Those 3 things have led to the fact that airline workers, who we would think would be at a much higher rate of exposure, which they are because in a confined space with lots of people, are at a much less rate. So I think that's a very positive sign. Everything you guys are doing will actually help. I think the second thing, very, very important, is when you look at the flu season that's coming up and everybody's concerned about it, right? Guess what happened in the Southern Hemisphere, right? In the Southern Hemisphere, we're looking at the fall that starts in March and ends in May this year, and their winter is from June to August. The data is actually showing that flu practically disappeared in the Southern Hemisphere. Why is that? Well, actually because of COVID. Because of COVID, the precautions they were taking, of course, there were shutdowns and quarantining and hygiene principles and mask wearing and better filtration and ventilation in a cold climate situation. The flu was reduced to the fact that it did not even exist, practically did not exist. So I think that's a real positive sign in terms of as we go into the winter months, we're all concerned about this. We may be something positive about this as we move forward. It'll not be easy, I know. You will continue to switch in terms of one model to the other. And I do think that, if you get a chance, take a look at the Mayo website and their dynamic data, because that will allow you to even predict future. So you can start planning that if you're going to switch, you can say, oh my God, looks like in 2 weeks, I'm going to have to start going to a hybrid model based on these predictions. Let's plan for that and move this thing forward. So I think that that's important. Leverage a lot of these technical resources that are out there. Again, we're going to be loading all this information up on our website, so please feel free to reach out to that. You have all the contact information, everybody's email addresses. Hopefully, if you have any questions, I think everybody is responding relatively fast. So use those resources as you see fit. So with that, have a great Friday and a great weekend. And hopefully looks like we're going to continue this through October, and we'll keep connecting with you every Friday. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for all the panelists.